Hi everyone, it's Carolyn here from We Teach Well. Today we're going to be talking about education technology conferences and how effective they are for classroom teachers. We're privileged to be joined by three amazing educators who have experience in such conferences. They are Lauren Sayer, Executive Director of Research and Innovation at Melbourne Girls Grammar, Michelle Dennis, Head of Digital at Haileybury, and Stephen Kolber, a teacher and Executive Secretary of Teachers Across Borders. We were going to be joined by Kieren Nolan, who had to, unfortunately and disappointingly for him, drop out today due to family issues. But the other three will have plenty to say, I'm sure. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I work, the Yalukut Wilam clan of the Boonwurrung, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. We also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which our guests work and live. We acknowledge and uphold their continuing relationship to this land. There are a number of education conferences that are run every year. Some are around specific subject areas, others are more general. Then there are the education technology ones, and they're a whole different beast. We were fortunate to be given a sponsored pod at the EdTech conference in 2009. We wouldn't have been able to afford it otherwise. It was overwhelming. Walking into a huge space at the conference centre in Sydney was daunting. Hundreds and hundreds of booths and pods, and what seemed like thousands of people. There were certainly interesting things to see, but my memories of the event are tied pretty much to the swag. As I told Kieren, I still have the Project Rocket sticker. I needed the physical item to drag memories out from the chaos. So later on, we're going to talk about the virtual conferences that we've just had, but to start with, can I get your thoughts on the in-person events? So as a teacher, whether as a speaker, buyer, or simple attendee, do you find those kinds of conferences helpful? Lauren.
I do is probably one of the things I do find in-person conferences really helpful, but maybe not necessarily for the reason conference organisers possibly think that I do. I get to meet people that I see online all the time, and like the people that are in today, and I get to talk with them, I get to attend sessions together, and I get to work with them as a community and have those discussions. And that's what I get out of it as a teacher. As a speaker, I think I get the same things. I get the ability to talk about something, and that's interesting, but more important is the conversation afterwards, and the conversation at morning tea, and the conversation at lunch, and the email addresses, and that physical bit that I get at the end where I get to continue. I started at the start of my career. I remember seeing somebody, and they keynoted, and I kept this habit for the rest of, well, I'm still doing it today, but I saw Stephen Heppel speak, and I was a graduate, and at the end of it, I went up to him and I said, that was wonderful, I've got a couple of questions and those sorts of things. What I do have now with Stephen, and he's one of these people that I have a lifelong friendship with him. When he comes to Melbourne, I go out for ice cream. And if I ever need anything, he helps me. And I think that in-person conferences, you only get what you put in. And if you don't make the effort to not be passive, you don't get something. So I've made a habit of, it's probably about me as a person, but I go up to whoever it is and ask them if I can contact them later. What I can say about that now is I am yet in my whole career to have anyone that said, no, I don't want to speak to you after this conference, or that when I followed them up with a request, they've ignored my request. And I think that's what I love about in-person conferences is I have a person-to-person connection with that person where they've met with me and I've met with them, and I can develop a working relationship, or in my case with Stephen, a lifelong friendship.
Michelle, you're next.
I definitely think that there is an element of making connections. For me, it's not always with the speaker, but the person who sits next to you. Or I was lucky enough to attend edtech before COVID happened. And one of the amazing things about that conference is it's so big that they take over the city, and everyone you run into happens to be an educator. So I was waiting for coffee before a conference, because a session, because you need coffee at conferences. Please, people who are organizing them, make note that is the most important part of a conference. And they ended up being someone who helped me out with starting a podcast with my class, and they were doing this amazing US history podcast. I think that for me, like those incidental things, the people you meet along the way are some of the richer experiences for me, because that's when you start looking outside the bubble of your school. It can be very insular in the educational technology area, because often there's only one of us, or you have to be in a fairly big school to have a team of people working in edutech. And so the time when we get our learning and our collaboration and that growth that you get when you're amongst other people with similar experience and passion, other than online, you don't get that in real life very often. So I think that's probably for me one of the greatest things that I got out of those physical conferences. But depended on the conference, some conferences were more had more of a collaborative, collegial feeling to them than others, just like everything else in life, I guess.
Yeah. And Stephen, I forgot to mention in the introduction, Stephen is a teacher at Brunswick Secondary College, a Victorian state government school. And Stephen, what are your thoughts on?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just agree with what's come before. I guess it's sort of face to face. It's either, as Lauren said, you kind of like, for me, it's like you spend more time scanning the audience than you do listening to who's presenting. Maybe that's, again, as Lauren said, maybe that's just a me thing. But you kind of like, oh, who's, who else is here that I know? And then if it's going well, then, you've got your little posse and it's like, all right, what are we going to next? And you sit at the back and, joke amongst yourselves, and you might think, this person, then you get that feeling of, oh, this person's meant to be good, or I've heard them before, or that sort of thing. Whereas online, I'm fine, and I don't want to jump the gun on a question or anything, but online, it's like that sense of community isn't quite there. But yeah, when you're a speaker, I think it's a lot easier, because you kind of come in and it's sort of like, I don't know, being backstage at a comedy show or something. It's like we're all there together, and we all know, we're all kind of a bit nervous about it and a bit whatever. And, it's like you're instantly bonded together by your shared anxiety and nervousness that, okay, we're going to go talk soon. We're going to talk soon. And then afterwards, it's like you talked well or whatever, because, your average audience or attendee is just kind of sitting there going, oh yeah, whatever. So they don't necessarily know good from bad, so they're just taking it in. But if you're one of the speakers, it's like, all right, I'll be there to support you. You support me. You be the nodder in the front row, going, oh yeah, oh great point, because we all need that. And just you also need the people who will stay behind, like Lauren said, and you need your people that will talk to you beforehand, so that you can kind of calm your nerves and talk to someone in the front row and be like, oh, how's everything going? What? Yeah. So it's all just kind of leaning on different people in different ways, and getting that sense of community is something I'm sure we all miss as we all stare at each other's Zoom instead of something much nicer. Yeah.
Different conferences have different protocols around who pays what. But as a general rule, conferences like this are expensive to attend. Do you think, where's the correlation between how much it may cost and the offer of value for money? Now, Stephen, we've had a conversation around this area. So how would you like to have a go first?
For me, so as a government school teacher, basically there's limited budget for this sort of thing. And especially, I can only imagine being my principal and just constantly receiving emails from me saying, oh, I'm presenting at this, that, and the other. And I'm also heavily involved in the AEU as well. So that gives me about 3 or 4 days out every term. So the pinch is starting to be felt of, okay, does he work for us or does he work for all these other people? So to me, if I wasn't attending as a speaker, I probably almost wouldn't attend, just because if it was a double ask of you need to pay to have me replaced by someone else and then also pay, $500, $600 for a couple of days, that would be a tougher sell than just I'm going to this thing and it's cost neutral because I'm a speaker. But yeah, obviously in an ideal world, we as clever education teacher people would be recompensed for our time and our expertise, because there's not that many people like us who do nothing much but education. We live, eat, breathe, tweet, Facebook, everything education all of our lives. So yeah, there's not that many of us. So it would be nice if we were to be not just free attendees, but actually paid for our work or expertise. But hey, maybe that's a bit pie in the sky, optimistic thinking.
There's a teacher I've been following for quite some time in the States, Pernil Rip, her name is, and she does a lot of work with middle school reading. Some fantastic ideas for books for middle school. And she wrote a post about this. She was speaking, I think it was the ISTE tech people, that sounds right. Yeah, so she was going to be a speaker at the ISTE conference a couple of years ago. It was during her summer break, so she was on holiday. But she had to pay, she had to pay to go. She had to pay the fee and the airfares and a hotel room, and enough to cover the incidentals. And she said, actually, when you add that all up, and the fact that I'm not going to be able to look after my kids, so I have to organize something else for them. She was saying pretty much what you were saying in a way is, if they really want teachers on teachers' salaries to go to these events, something needs to happen about affordability. Lauren, your thoughts?
Yeah, because I've sat on both sides of the fence here. I've worked for a vendor and I've worked as a teacher and still work as a teacher. But I think the interesting bit for this is the rise of the unconference. So I've been to ISTE 4 times in my career, and massive. And I've been twice on study tours, which I would recommend to anyone, where I visited schools for 10 days beforehand and met network people. And I was on a trip with 20 other teachers from Australia.
Okay.
And then I've been just as an attendee. But I think back to what Stephen said before of you meet your people and you go to where it is. I think the value proposition of very, very large conferences on that scale and cost is the community that's there. And I have to say that day 1, day 2, I sort of went to a few sessions. What you end up with is a bit what Stephen said of, you get the people that you know have spoken, but they're at the conference as an attendee. And I know that, what am I going to get more out of? Am I going to get more out of sitting and having lunch with Stephen and having a discussion with Stephen about everything he does there, or sitting in a session with 70 or 80 other people where it's a pre-position, and it's a bit like my ice cream with Stephen Heppel of what do I get more out of? And I think the value proposition is who's there. From a speaker and a teacher perspective, I think it has to be accessible that you can attend. But I think from a teacher perspective, conferences make money. There is a business. They are a profit-making thing. Paying people to speak beyond just covering their costs has to be there. But it is a fine line, because I've gotten to go to so many conferences over my career because I've sung for my supper. Exactly what Stephen said of, I get to go because I speak. If I went to apply to go, there's a limited budget and I wouldn't be able to go. And I manage a professional learning budget at my school now, and I'm in an independent school. Beyond subject association, your end of year conference for your history teachers or your maths teachers or those, I have to say it would be very rare to approve a very large conference. The other one that's interesting is a very large online conference that's got a cost that's prohibitive. Being able to see that value proposition's even harder to be able to do, because I can't meet with people afterwards and I can't do the different bits. And I think, but where those big conferences are starting to do well is offering other value adds that are there. And I know of being able to do an accreditation, so that when you've gone to that conference, you may have done something, but then you get a micro credential that sits alongside that. So then there's a dual purpose, that there is a value proposition, that I'm doing something with a clear credential that's sitting there. And then that is versus just passively attending a conference. Because I suppose managing a professional learning budget, what is my bang for buck of sitting there and being passive? And it depends on the type of person. If I'm the person that gets out and makes the most of it, or Michelle or Stephen, where you're there and you're meeting all these people and you come back with all of these connections, then yes. But for every one of those, there's also someone else that isn't good at connecting, isn't good at doing that, sits there, might go home, may not. So how do you determine, I suppose, if you're sitting in my seat managing a professional learning budget, what's the ROI? What's that return on investment for this? And what I am seeing is, if I go from 7 or 8 years ago when I managed a professional learning budget at the children's to now, I see less teachers investing in conferences and asking to go to conferences, and more teachers asking to go to get a credential or something very bespoke and specific to their needs. So I think I see trends in where teachers are asking for their professional learning money to be spent.
I think the other thing to remember with conferences is, even if they were free, there is a cost to the school in terms of the cover. And in fact, often the logistics of that cover are more of a problem for the school than the cost of the conference itself. And so that is where, there have been conferences which have been held on school holidays and on Saturdays and things like that to try and get around that. And I guess I find that really disappointing. I've been in a committee for a subject association where we've made decisions like that just simply because it's the only way people get time out of school. And the only way we could support teachers is by doing it at that time, so that country teachers could make it to the city and we could meet all those competing demands. I don't know if there is a solution there, but I do think that that it is increasing concern and pushback, not just the conference cost itself, but the time away from classes. And I think I would like to see, from an equity point of view, I would like to see them look more at perhaps having a more open model where they do let schools with less resources have access to some of those experiences. I know, like, as a school that could afford to pay, I would happily take a 10% on top of what they're currently charging if I knew that they were also giving away access to other schools. I think there are ways to do that, and I would really love to see that come out a little bit more as well. I know they're money-making machines, but we're educators, so I think it's an important area to really, as a community, push back on as well.
I find those comments interesting because I think I've come to it the other way around. most of the connections I have in education now, I've met through TeachMeet or through Aussie Ed online. And I think the highlight of the edtech conference in 2019 was the Ed Poets Society, where I actually got to meet Zena and the others who I had known on Twitter or that, but hadn't actually seen in person. And I would say the vast majority of my connections in education have actually been virtual. So that's a little different. But yeah, I can't imagine any of the schools that I taught in would be able to support teachers going to something like those edtech conferences, because they're just huge. All right, moving forward, Lauren and Stephen, you both spoke at edutech, the recent one, the online virtual one. And Michelle, did you attend any of the sessions for that?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
And she spoke.
How did I miss that?
Oh, it was
She's
part
secret,
of the
secret Adobe.
Ah, okay. Hang on, let me just hide my phone. I forgot to turn it off.
Aren't we all secret Adobe? Isn't that the open secret?
Yeah, but I'm such a fangirl. I you know, you'll find that I probably have a tattoo or something. No, I don't actually. Sorry. Actually, can we pause the recording at this point?
You're much more secret Adobe than all of us. That's for sure.
Yeah. I am inept. I'm Adobe inept. No matter how hard Tim has tried to teach me how to use it, I have never been able to get my head around it. So
give me a go sometime. I've taught
Michelle taught me. No, I've been to Michelle's teaching sessions. I can Photoshop a koala with the best of them.
I keep running out of practice time. My trials keep running out of time.
Fair enough.
And then I stress, so it's ridiculous. So anyway, your thoughts on the different platform, the virtual versus. Michelle, you're in front of me in a big picture. So.
Oh, lucky me. Okay, so there are many good things about it being virtual. One is that you can attend in the gaps between the other things that are happening in your school life. So for the teachers who aren't in leadership positions, where sometimes it can be hard to get, I'd really love to see more development and more people coming up and being able to step up and learn and eventually become leaders themselves. So for people who are just wanting to grab a little bit more and they otherwise might not have been approved to, that's really good. You know, it's often of a lower cost, not always, maybe free, not always, and something that you can do in those gaps, whether, you know, I stayed up till 3 a.m. At one stage for the Adobe Max one. Like I said, I'm like obsessive compulsively sad, but those opportunities are there for you. The downside, certainly for me, is the loss of connection, but also when you're there, you're there. That is your main focus. School is put aside and the big thoughts happen. It's when you have that time to dream about what education could be and how we could shape it and how we can make it. But when it's virtual and it's crammed in between this meeting, I go pop into the conference, then I've got this one. I can't get out of that exact meeting because it has to happen. And for me, it loses a lot of that opportunity to really make an impact. And that's one of the losses I feel. But that could just be also the way I'm approaching it. It could be that some people are staying at home those days. Well, at home, we're all at home, but you know, not at school, and are in fact, you know, not going to meetings and things like that. But I suspect that a lot of us are trying to do both at the same time. Maybe I might be wrong.
Lauren, I don't think you'd be wrong. It's going to be different for everyone, isn't it?
I think it depends on with virtual and I think where there are, look, in a perfect world, I think they'd be hybrid and we'd have a bit of both in how this works. But at the moment we can't. What I do like about the current format of some of them is the mix of synchronous and asynchronous. The fact that I can watch some things live and participate live in a chat. I also like being able to watch them later.
Replayed, yeah.
And being able to do that. I also like the accessibility of that from an equity perspective. The fact that, speaking at edtech, I spoke and it was live and everyone was in the chat and we had that. But then I got the YouTube link that I could then share with my network. So if people by some chance decided that they wanted to listen to me rant about edtech choices, they could without having to sign up to that conference. And I thought that balance is very, very good because it meant that I know that people who watch some of mine would never go to edtech. That's not their conference. They're going to other things. They wouldn't go to that. But for some strange reason, they thought they might want to listen to what I had to say. So they got the best of both. And I think being able to do that is good and having the focus of it, because I'm not a podcaster and I'm not a YouTuber or a TikToker of how all this works. So I'm not a content creator. I find it it's not my thing. I'm not good at it. But when someone asks me to speak, I will speak. But if you ask me to voluntarily give you my thoughts once a week on a YouTube channel, that's not who I am. I don't have enough thoughts to do that is probably the easiest way to say it. But I think the invitation and the way it goes to speak, and I think that it works really well, and it's that building of a community. And Stephen does that incredibly well with edu reading, of actually keeping me honest, making me read, and the invitation. And I think the benefit of the virtual conference and the virtual platforms is that you can call people to action who might not usually be there, where in an in-person conference, you sit there, you're quite passive. The virtual ones, you can actually go, hey, what about this person and what about this person? And I think there's that benefit.
Yeah, we just before Stephen, we were given a booth again through EduGrowth. And by the way, all the EduGrowth sessions are now uploaded on YouTube, all of them, for people who want to. So we were given a booth, which at the last minute, which took a bit of, working, but I found the process so much easier. I mean, I'm an extrovert, so you would think I would love the in-person, 1,000 people thing. But no, that did my head in. With the online one, I could look up Global Vic or someone and actually click on, directly message the person I wanted to talk to or set up a meeting with, without having to walk around and try and find their booth. It was, to me, it was easier, more controllable, I guess. And maybe I'm just giving away a little bit of my own control freak sort of things, but I actually found it much better. Stephen, your turn.
Yeah, let me think. The edutech for me was like a last minute, oh, okay, I'm back on situation. I think originally I spoke with the organizer and she said, oh, we want you to talk about curriculum changes. And I thought, oh, okay, well, I was in the paper quoted saying something about the new history curriculum. I was like, is that what you mean? And she said, I think so. Yeah. This all sounds good. Because the change to the history curriculum is a lot more of a Indigenous perspective being added. So I thought, oh, that's an interesting thing to talk about. And then several weeks later, I saw my name listed under developments in Indigenous curriculum or something. And I thought, well, unfortunately, as a non-Indigenous person, and not having any context on that topic at all. So I quickly withdrew from that and said, that's not really my area. So I agree with Lauren, it's always good to be asked to speak, but sometimes you have to say it's not my area. And that was that case. And then last minute, I was like, oh, could you do a pre-record for something? So I just did the same thing I always do forever, which is video, yada, 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 all the same thing.
It was good. It was a good session.
Well, it's weirdly popular. I was on the YouTube channel. It's ranked behind keynote sessions for some reason. I think it's because it's got a very bizarre thumbnail that automatically generated. So it's actually my head of digital learning and technology gesturing to me like this, as though like, look at this guy. But that's definitely not the way that works. So yeah, edutech. The problem for me personally is losers like us. There's just too many conferences to go to. So my Google Calendar is just full of, at the Adobe this and the Google that and the edutech this, and also teaching my classes as well. So as Michelle said, you're kind of multitasking and sort of jumping across platforms and doing all those sort of things. So if it wasn't lockdown, maybe it'd be better. I think the benefit of face-to-face, like the thing that you are paying for is a day off school to have time to think and to unwind. And like Michelle said, think of the future of education. And so your average conference day would be, you'd see 2 or 3 sessions early in the morning, and then usually you just rack off for the rest and sit staring out a window, as the raindrops fall on the glass or whatever, and reflect. Oh, was that good? Is that possible? Could we? Should we? Or even better with a crew of like-minded people having those discussions. But yeah, online's just like online teaching at the moment. It's like it's all right, but it ain't the thing. That would be my summary.
Yeah, it would. I think the idea of a hybrid is a good one. But I find myself signing up for workshops and conferences at the moment purely so that I'll get the recording and be able to watch it if and when I have the time or remember. So you're just signing up for everything and hoping that something's going to, I remember that.
Unless someone messages you and says, are you in this? And then you're like, I better be in it.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting one, and I think we have to be really wary around whether that is best practice professional learning, because it is very much, I refer to it as the sheep dip model. So if you know sheep dipping, if you're from a farm, a sheep dip is you dip the sheep in the insecticide and you hope that some of it sticks so that when they go out into the field, they're not being bitten by flies. And I think sometimes these conferences are a bit of, we'll throw a whole lot of stuff at you and hopefully something will stick when you get back.
Yeah.
I have to say, holding a budget, that doesn't pass the pub test for me anymore.
No. Yeah. No, the two that I first think of, the other one is, of course, the NES, which I was actually really disappointed. If edutech had been cancelled, I don't know that I would have been as disappointed, but I was disappointed at the NES one being cancelled for the year, the National Education, throw in the S, Stephen. Summit, there's the word. I actually haven't gone to that one when we first met. After we talked, but when we first met. I liked the vibe there. And because it's primarily K-12, I think it felt very different to the edutech one, which there's a lot of stuff for tertiary and sort of big companies. So that, I think it depends on that. So, and Laura and I've been sharing this around, so I hope you don't mind. So there are billions of dollars being spent on edtech each and every year. Some of it's great, lots of STEM stuff, some great ideas and inventions. But as someone on the fringe of edtech for the last 3 or 4 years, it seems that the ones that get the most airtime are those around data collection or tutoring or some management system that would be, much better than the one you've got. And apart from the big companies like Google, Microsoft, Adobe, and the like, the sort of digital Pearsons, I call them, when you're looking to get new technology for your school, what are you looking at? If you were going to the conference and you were in the market for a new product for your school, what is it that you are looking for? Stephen.
So prefacing everything with at a government school, we're not in the market for anything. We buy what's free, and then we make do with everything else. We pretty much every Victorian government school uses PAT test because that's low cost, and we all use Compass because again that's low cost as an LMS. I'm sure I could, ask one question on any forum anywhere, and someone would say, "Well, there's 20 other options, and here's the strengths and weaknesses." But we just don't have the budget to consider any of those factors. So my go-to is at something like an edtech, as your phony messages get filled up, and I'm sure Lauren gets this at a much higher volume than me, let's say. But people say, "Oh, I'd love to meet to talk you through or whatever," and invariably it's a Zoom call, and they're within 30 seconds they've shared their screen and they've got some whiz-bang Canva slides that they're taking you through about how. My favorite recently was someone told me that they've created the TikTok for education. And I thought, oh, so TikTok. And he said, no, not TikTok. I said, oh, okay, because that's being used for education, but sure, okay. And I said, oh, so like Flipgrid. He said, oh, no, not Flipgrid. It's better than Flipgrid. And I said, oh, okay, in what ways? Anyway. But essentially, my go-to is when someone says, hey, we've got a technology, I either say, I have no money, or if you'll pay for my time, I'll come to watch your clunky slide presentation. And unfortunately, they all then disappear, which is deeply unsettling for me because I love a PowerPoint via Zoom. It's just my favorite thing. So it's a real shame that they just disappear when I say put some money behind it. Because, it's just one of those things. Like quite recently, someone said, "Oh, I work in AR, VR. Would love to, workshop some ideas." And I said, "At a government school, we have no money, but happy to help." And then, it's kind of like, "Oh, all right." There won't be any AR goggles anywhere near our school for many years until they're consumer accessible. For me, like I'm just not in the market. But Michelle and Lauren can probably speak to that more comfortably than I.
I'll get to Lauren at the end because she said something really interesting not long ago that I want to sort of bring up with that. So, Michelle, what are your thoughts as far as if you're in the market for new technology?
There is a lot of technology out there and in schools, and I guess my job is to try and be the bonsai gardener and make sure that what we've got is effective and that we don't add things that are unnecessary, because most people aren't me who loves playing with new technology and learning it. Unfortunately, I don't know why, but like most people actually have a limited amount of time to devote their brain cells towards things like that. It's not that they're not capable, it's just that for them, their focus is on education. Who knew? As teachers. And so I guess what I try and do when I'm at a conference looking at what new ed tech is around, I try and firstly go in with an eye to the future. Where is the trends heading? So trying to identify where those potential things are that I need to be aware of so that I can start preparing for shifts, and with an eye to what we're already, is it going to add any benefit? Is it going to make teaching and learning any better than what we're already doing? Because there's no point in shifting for a minute gain when users are already, they know how to use it. It's in our systems. Change management is something that is absolutely worthwhile if you know that you're going to get the benefit of it, but otherwise So, but if you know me and you know my love of tech, that's a very hard thing to do, because sometimes I just go, oh, this is so cool.
I forget what I was going to say then. But the idea for this session came because I heard Lauren speaking at an EduGrowth online thing, and the comment, if I get it wrong, it's my old memory going, was that she had checked before she came to the call, and she'd had 15 emails from people offering solutions to problems she didn't have, and which I thought, I heard a lot, and I thought, let's talk more about this. And the other thing was at edtech last week, Lauren shared her pro forma school digital tool audit. That was the one, which is used, because I was going to say, do you have protocols or checklists that you have to, mark off if you're going to buy a digital purchase? But the tool that Lauren put up was really good, and I must admit I've shared it with a few people. So can you, Lauren, if you don't mind, can you talk a little bit more to that?
Yeah, I suppose we look at things. I'm self-confessed for someone that's ended up in digital, and I think it's go right back to my background in teaching. Digital found me. I probably didn't find digital. I was a primary school teacher, and I had a double degree, and I did PE, and you got a choice after your first year of PE. You got to do outdoor ed or you got to do digital tech. I'm not a camper. I don't like camping. So I did digital tech. And from that moved into a primary school and became a literacy consultant. And tech found me throughout my career. And I've worked in the digital learning branch of the Department of Education and all of that. But I'm not, I admire the inquisitiveness of, and Michelle and I have incredibly complementary skills in our skill set, because I love watching Michelle.
Yep.
Because Michelle inspires me to get out of my comfort zone, because I'm not the one that looks at the gadgets, which is amusing because I've been in charge of a few digital things, but I think I look at in this space really from an educational perspective. You ask, well, how do I look at what tech's there to buy? What is it that I'm looking to solve? And I run in a and I think schools will have to get to more to this space, not just our school, but to a project management phase of what is the problem that you're trying to solve before you go to solution. And I'm in a few projects at the moment, and people keep going, oh, we could use this, and we could use this, and we could use this. And I'm like, yeah, but what are you trying to solve before we jump to solutions? Because it's irresistible to be able to do it, because people offer you one of everything with a whistle, and it becomes a bit of Malibu Stacy with the new hat. You're going, oh, I could do this, and nothing's perfect. But I think if you can quickly really look at a few things, and the first one is, what outcomes do you want out of this? So what is it that you're wanting? And be really clear and have one primary outcome and a couple of secondary ones maybe. And then, okay, so from that outcome, what are the objectives that you want met? And then what are the outputs from those objectives, and really looking at that model. And then from there, working out what your budget is. And if your budget's with Stephen and it's zero, we start to look at free, but working out your success sliders of, well, what would this look like? And then actually auditing what you already have. And my first day in a digital role, I remember asking my principal at the time, and they were incredibly generous. I said, can I shadow 5 senior school students for 2 weeks? And I think they looked at me like I was mad. And they said, yes. every class I went to, I wrote down every tool they were asked to use. I ended up with, I don't know if you've ever seen A Beautiful Mind, and there's all the different bits. I ended up with this crazy layer of an office of stuff that kids were being asked. So kids were being asked, and it was really phenomenal. I remember taking photos of it each day. Kids had 7 different note-taking apps across a VCE. You know, they were being asked to use everything. I said, this isn't functional. We would never expect our teachers to do this. It was brilliant. So really, the audit tool is incredibly simple. It's 3 things, and it's
would you like to share it?
Oh, it's okay. I can talk through it, but it's
okay.
What is the instructional purpose of whatever it is you're asking? What is that instructional purpose? If it's to monitor student progress, what is that purpose? And actually, I think that bit's where a lot of people first muck up, because they're like, I don't know what the instructional purpose is. And that's a professional learning red flag for me, because I want to know why you want to use it. And so if it's explicit instruction, it might be the video, you know, and Stephen and how that works. There's lots of free tools. And then what are the tools that are available that we have, and the costs and how it goes? What are they all? And then in my daily plan, is that core or is it optional? Because are we going to expect all of our teachers and students to use this, or is it optional? Because go back to that beautiful mind scenario. If something's core, we can't have 30 of them.
No.
You need one. And it needs to be one that most of us will get on. But if it's optional, if it's that, if you're Michelle and you love tech and you go, give me more, we need that. We need these people in our classrooms. And we need these people in our schools, because they push us to look at new things. And I go back to, I couldn't use, Michelle taught me Photoshop, but not, sorry, Tim Kitchen, if you're watching, but Michelle, I sat in Michelle's session at my school one day, and she got me to Photoshop a koala, and I learned, but Michelle had a clear purpose for me for my class, and she had one tool for me to use. She didn't have 70 tools for me to use. I walked away, and I've done courses in Photoshop, but once I had a purpose of, this is how I can use it in this classroom with my group of kids tomorrow, what Michelle gave me in 30 minutes, I can honestly say was more than I got from 25 YouTube clips that showed me how to Photoshop something. But that purpose, and that's what teachers need in tools, is they need to know what's it for, and it's how it's going to help me, because it doesn't make your life easier immediately.
No. Can I ask Michelle and Stephen, your role at Kilvington, Michelle, is that is part of that your Haileybury? Sorry, I mixed up Strathcona and went to Kilvington, and should have been Haileybury. My apologies.
You write my resume. That's like, you can. It sounds like by the time I've finished talking to you, I'm going to have a really great resume. I like it.
Well, just tell them to call me, and I'll. Is part of your job finding these new and useful technologies, or is that just something you do because you like it?
I think that's part of why I'm in my job, in terms of like, I'm the, you know, when I go back to me as a teacher, I was always looking for what can I make better, and how can I use tech to make, I like using tech, but I like using tech to make things better. So someone who's good at tech generally is actually quite lazy. Don't get me wrong. It's not that we don't work hard. It's just like, we don't want to work hard on the stuff that something else could do for us.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm always looking for, is like, is there a way I can, if I can automate something so a teacher can spend more time actually teaching and less time on paperwork, whether it's for excursions or function requests or whatever. I want that. I want to make sure that my teachers are spending as much time teaching, and when they're teaching, it's as effective as possible. And for me, that is exploration and going out there and seeing what's out there, seeing what's there. I'm, the vanguard who goes out, tries it and goes, yeah, it works. No, it's a fail. Maybe we need to look into it more, that kind of thing. So not everything I go out and find is going to be useful. Some of it is horrifying. Some of it is, frankly, stuff that I think should be illegal.
You need both.
But you need someone who's going to come back and say, okay, so I can see that video is a trend, or I can see artificial intelligence being able to predict student achievement and start really being much more better at how we use the massive amounts of data that students generate. I can see the impact that would have on education, and here's the way we can start doing that. Those are the kind of things that I go out there to do. Sometimes I go out there with a problem to solve, and sometimes I go out there just as a discovery. But not everything is worthwhile.
Stephen, government school. Is there such a person? Or
yes, yeah, there is. It's not me, thankfully. But we're probably, for a government school for sure, we felt way ahead of the curve because we jumped from, Microsoft OneNote, which was working reasonably well, to Teams. And that was, partly it was my fault, I got to be honest. So we got a new head of digital technology, and he came from a Google school, which in itself is quite horrendous that there's such a thing as branded schools, Apple, Google, yes. Microsoft. I wouldn't want to go to a cornflakes restaurant or school myself, but hey, that's just me. So he came from a Google school, and he was like, we're thinking of transitioning over to Google. Thankfully, I had nice little connections at Microsoft, so we had the head of Microsoft education in Australia or something come out to our school and do the age-old click through some websites and some teams, and here's how it works and what it does. And thankfully, to my eyes, we averted the potential Google change. Not that there's anything wrong with Google or Microsoft; no. They're reasonably the same. But the amount of human hours that go into that kind of a change from one to the other is just immense. So thankfully, we stayed in the same lane, and I think that set us up pretty well. That now that we're remote teaching, everyone was across the basic functionality, and it was just saying, "Oh, and if you click this bit, now you're in a video with the kids." So yeah, we feel pretty prepared. In terms of my role, I would say I'm part Michelle and part myself, and what I bring to that is like a level of criticality. So there's a lot of, I don't even know if that's a word, I'm not confident with that one. But basically, I'm keeping track of all the big techs. You mentioned Pearson earlier. That's kind of my big thing. And where me and various global union movements, we're looking at the way that teaching itself can be impinged upon by technology like AI. And so as a result, I try and keep across that because, otherwise it's very easy to sit in a room and people think AI and then they're saying, ha ha ha, Terminator, and you're thinking, okay, you've got no idea what's going on. Or killer robots or that kind of bizarre stuff. So I think it behooves some of us in education to keep a track of the potential pitfalls of AI and set up early, and that's something I've done through Education International and the AU Victoria, setting up guidelines about AI usage and making it as opaque as possible, as understandable, as comprehensible, all those sort of things. Because there's lots of tech companies pushing pretty hard into education. And so we need at least a couple of people clued up enough to, be standing at the gate or at the door sort of saying, I don't think we need, facial recognition software so that we don't have to mark the roll, which takes all of 30 seconds and is indeed maybe an important part of looking people in the eye, but just that sort of thing. And that's obviously a pretty egregious and obvious example that most people would go, yeah, we might not need that. But there's much more in potentially insidious types of technologies as well. So I'm with Michelle. AI could definitely speed up a lot of the things that we do and do them a lot quicker than us. But also in other contexts, in third world countries, you could just as easily replace untrained or non-trained teachers with AI and scripted lessons from an iPad rather than upskilled professional teachers. But hey, obviously this is one of my rant topics, so I've gotten into it, and I will now dissuade myself from continuing. But yeah.
Well, actually, no, because you've just entered my rant space, which is really helpful. One of the things that I did discover at the edtech last week or week before was a much larger percentage of the people speaking who were talking about the importance of teachers. Having been on the edge of it for a few years, there has been a lot of talk about, I've heard them talk about teacher proofing and about, what you're talking about, where AI could, replace teachers. But a large number of people in the sessions I were listening to, and a couple who are sort of well known in the edtech area, were talking about the fact that we have learned that for good learning, teachers are critical, that we can't replace teachers, that we will never be able to replace teachers because of the human connection that is so important for students to actually learn anything, and that we need to support the teachers and provide upskilling for the teachers. I found that I came away from it with a great sense of hope, I think, which is not always how I feel at the end of those things, with the idea that people who are not, or maybe haven't been for a while, are remembering the importance of the human element, of the value of the teacher to the students, which I thought was, which I liked a lot. I thought that was good.
I think as long as the human element is the human element and not an anti-tech element, I have to say that I am watching and have watched students struggle in an online session, but also absolutely thrive. I know of several students that prefer virtual schooling and prefer virtual learning and being part of a virtual community of practice rather than that. But I think what a teacher does in a virtual and online space is incredibly important, but I wouldn't be pitting online education against face-to-face or those sorts of things, because I think that virtual and the work, and definitely you only had to look at the Premier's Awards the other week and how many Virtual School Victoria nabbed, of a state school that, I think basically all the algorithmics ones were from Virtual School Victoria, of how that worked. I think we can have great quality experiences wherever we have highly effective, planned professionals working with engaged learners. And if that is online, that's as online. But I think the cost-cutting bit is the bit of robbing Peter to pay Paul, because I remember visiting a virtual school in San Francisco 7 years ago, where basically kids were put into credit recovery virtual learning, which if they didn't pass maths, they moved them away from a teacher and they moved them to a virtual tutoring program, because from an economic perspective, they decided that those kids from an AI were not going to go any further in their maths, so we may as well just put them in a virtual classroom. That's a political and economic judgment, not a importance of a teacher.
That's horrifying.
It was
horrifying. Yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit like Michelle, coming very late to the party, but oh my God, some of this stuff they do is so cool. Some of these tools that we can use. And somebody asked me, got in touch and said, how can we use tech in an English classroom? And I said, oh, well, you could, and started typing away madly. And they came back and said, okay, where can we get contacts for this to give to our head of English? Because there are some really good things that you can do with free technology. and things that students already have access to. So to sort of tie up this idea, because we are talking about the concept of education conferences as a way of getting in touch with tech or finding out what's going on. So if each of you could think of one thing, if you had the organizers of all the sort of big edtech conferences together, what is the one thing that you would ask them to include that would make the conference more valuable for teachers?
I actually think we go back to Lauren's statements about what you look for in technology and apply that towards conferences. So I think we need to go back to what the purposes of conferences are, and in some ways redesign them. So make sure that there's more time for collaboration. I went to a conference recently that actually had, you could book 5 minutes with the speakers, which was fantastic. I was one of the people who was doing that kind of speed dating kind of thing. It wasn't dating, just to be clear, but anyone could come with a problem, any problem from, and it was EduTech Asia. And they got 5 minutes with me to help me, and I would try and help them solve it. And then a new problem every 5 minutes. And it was fantastic. I had so much fun learning about all these countries across Asia and the different problems they faced and what I knew that could help them. So going back to why we go to conferences and then looking at building up the opportunities for those, I think that would help conferences be meaningful again, or remain meaningful.
Lauren?
I think building on what Michelle said, we need to backwards design it. And I think it would work better for sponsors as well, because I think if you look at, I've worked for a vendor and I've paid big money for a booth at ISTE and at EduTech when I've worked in on that side. But I think if you get to a perspective of going, I'm going to talk about being a sponsor quickly. If I know that there are 70 people in that room that are all interested to hear about a specific area, that's worth 3 days of standing at a booth doing nothing. And I think from a conference perspective, actually us going out to those, instead of signing up for some random conference and then trying to fit in and you go, oh, well, I'll go to that, and that, because it sort of fits with what I'm doing and that makes it a good conference. I actually think backwards designing it, asking everyone what it is that they're wanting and who are they wanting to hear from. And then as a conference organizer, backwards planning that and curating that around the group of people that you've got there, and then curating the sponsors into that. So if we've got, I don't know, 80 people that are interested in AI and learning analytics, and they want to hear from this person, and this person, and then we've got these sponsors, that's a product that's incredibly valuable, because I'm not there to just see things, I'm there. And I think right back to Stephen's point of, I want to know who else is there from my tribe.
Yeah.
And I think in terms of that, of actually going, not just going, who do I want to speak to? Because or who do I want to hear from? Who do I want to be there with? And going, and I could rattle off names in the hundreds of who I'd like to be there with, of Aussie Ed and those sorts of people. And I think then if a conference organizer wrote to me and said, we've heard you, we've got these speakers and you'll be with these people, well, you've just organized my dream party in education world and I'm there and I've got the right sponsors. So I think we're going, what Michelle said, we're going about it, they're going about it the wrong way.
That's actually really interesting. That one's really interesting, because in every business course around, it's talk to your customers first. Don't create something until you've spoken to the people you want to sell it to. And that is applying the same the same situation, isn't it? Stephen, what's your one thing that you would ask them to?
Well, I mean, to me, it's interesting. We've been talking for almost an hour and 15 minutes. We haven't really talked about the learning element of these conferences. We've mostly talked about meeting people, learning, extra credentials, all these sort of things that are sort of adjacent, but not necessarily the thing. So for me, it'd be like you need to get people to do things beforehand and do things afterwards. So, and if that costs money, so instead of just saying, hey, you're a speaker, you've spoken before, throw some money at it and say, and then you could link the sponsors in and have them, be presenting their tool as one of the many tools to be used. But if I think of like anytime I've tried to get a conference up properly, it'd be, okay, well, we need people to, and it's always instructional video because that's sort of my thing. It'd be, okay, watch this, 30-minute professionally produced course that is everything I always say, but condensed and accessible and short and precise. Watch that first, create your own video, send it in, and then make it a workshop rather than just a lecture fest.
Yeah.
Because I could deliver you the 20 different lectures all on, different topics that you'd think, oh yeah, whatever, that didn't connect with me at all. But if I get you to do something beforehand, we actually engage with one another, as Michelle said, do a round table, get people around a similar subject, similar idea together, make it collaborative. Then you've got something, and have some sort of a follow up. A month down the track, how has that changed your practice or your beliefs or your opinions? It doesn't need to be student centric or student improvement related, but it needs to be learning design. Like recently I presented to some master's students in learning design, and I just said beforehand, I said, watch this video, and we spent the whole workshop going through 8 different people's video productions, and they explained, well, this is aimed at this student group, so I made these choices and used this technology, and the students were expected to do this, and we were able to discuss learning design, cognitive load theory, multimedia cognitive load theory, all the kind of big theories, because essentially all the research, you get to a point where you go, okay, the research tells me this, and then you basically, the rubber needs to hit the road, and you need to say, in this context, I'm going to make this choice. And so the only way you get that is by running a workshop and actually engaging with actual practice rather than pie in the sky theory. So to me, it's got to be something like that. We know good professional learning is ongoing and continuous and all those sort of things. And then conferences are from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. or whatever it is. You've got to find a way to stretch that out somehow, artificially or virtually, or in the old days, you make it 3 days, people stay in a hotel, above the conference center or whatever it is, and turn up nice and early. Like Michelle said, you meet them bedraggled at the coffee cart in the morning, and then you get that community happening of kind of connecting things across. But online, it's just one and done. And then, so there's no actual learning. There is lots of socializing and networking, but no actual learning occurring usually.
I'm sorry to cut in. I'm aware that Michelle has work to return to at this time on a Friday evening and needs to leave us. And I imagine Lauren and Stephen, you have other things that you would like to do on a Friday night. But can I say thank you very much to all 3 of you. Thank you for your generosity of giving your time and your enormous amount of experience in this area. Thank you very much.